anything, and he really doesn't sugarcoat a lot in the book either. Like there's not like a lot of fluffiness around what's going on. So and that's probably particularly important as you start to talk about pornography.
Yeah.
I'm just
throwing it out there. Just
pornography, sex. I mean, it is what it is. Like, and it is amazing because as a believer, you know, these are things that, and I think maybe these are more generational, maybe not cultural. I think these are things that as a generation we can say that, you know, our generation is more inquisitive or more, you know, wide than maybe the generation that came before us and the generation that came before that, the grandmothers and stuff. So you really don't. You hear more of, when you talk about sex, it's more of a don't do, it's more of a, okay, but no one's explaining these things to young people, or older people. That's probably why, you know, how we got here. But, you know, because of that, it's kind of created a culture where sex is this like elusive thing that we all know that we want, but we can't talk about.
Yeah.
So it almost makes it really hard as a believer to kind of actually be pure and to kind of, really do what God is having us to do because we may not necessarily understand why.
Right.
So you actually mentioned that to kind of help you overcome that you would actually talk about sex, and that would be something that you say, you know what, I don't know how other people deal with this, but me actually having conversations helps. Now, what other way, of course, I mean, you already gave that example, but what other ways can young people and especially the older generation kind of come to a terms to where they can sit down and talk about these different issues so that, you know, a whole nother generation doesn't fall victim because of not knowing.
Yeah. I think it's just important to have those conversations. And somebody has to present, you know, excuse me, kind of the ability to do that. And so I'm actually working on another book, and it centers on pornography, on sexuality, that sort of thing. Just trying to shatter that notion, shatter that thought process that, hey, this is taboo and we shouldn't talk about it. No, we should, you know, because whether or not you believe it, like your 16, 17-year-old is thinking about sex, you know, if they're not having it.
12, 13, 14-year-old.
Right. And your 9, 10-year-old, if they're not watching pornography, they got friends telling them about it on the playground, you know, whether or not you think that's the case or not. And I think for our generation, it's so much more pervasive. Because for our parents, you know, in order to get caught up in these things, you had to go get a magazine, or you know, you had to actually go into a strip club or something like that, store, you know, where they had ID. You know, now if you put something in wrong, you can be trying to go to ESPN.com. If you put ESPN.com in wrong, you might end up at a porn site. You know, that, and you know, in 10 seconds you can pull out your smartphone, naked woman. You know, you pull out your laptop in 10 seconds, naked woman. Not even just, you know, nudity or you know, explicit sexuality, but excuse me, nudity and explicit sexuality to whatever you want, right? And so if your desire, excuse me, is for a middle-aged white woman, you know, you can go find that in 5 seconds. You know, if your desire is for a black man, you can go find that. You know, if you like whatever it is that's going on in your mind, going on, you know, fantasy-wise, you can find that in 5 or 10 seconds in our generation. So it's important to have these conversations, and it's important for older people, for mentors to teach the young kids why it's important to stay away from those things, why pornography is so pervasive and just so negative and just so encapsulated, you know, why sex should wait till marriage. And even want to expand on that conversation. You know, I preface this by saying I totally agree, you know, that sex is best within the confines of marriage, but I think we have to get past just the conversation of just don't do it.
Exactly.
You know, because it's the only need, it's really the only human biological need that we say, hey, you can't do this until you get married. You know, if you're thirsty, you go get a drink of water. You know, if you're hungry, you go get something to eat. You know, when you're sleepy, you go to bed. But you know, when you're 16 and you start having these hormones and urges, nah, you can't do that. And I agree that it should wait till marriage, but we have to start having conversations and exploring different ways to help young people get past this, right? Because, I mean, you know, a century ago, you know, when Paul wrote that, you know, people weren't waiting until 26, 27 to get married. You know, nowadays the average for a man or woman to get married is 26, 27, 28. So I have these hormones start coming at 14, 15, you know, where I can reproduce. You know, I got 10, 11, 12, 13 years to where I have these urges and I'm not supposed to act on them. You know, I need tools to help do that. You know, I need mentors and people around me, and I need safe havens to talk about this with people who can really help me through that. It can't just be a no, don't do that. that conversation has to expand, and it has to expand in the church, because if the church doesn't expand it, then the world will expand it. If the church is not teaching our youngsters about sexuality and about staying away from pornography, then the world will teach them, and it'll be a negative consequence to that. And so we kind of have to lead the way on that. The same way the church kind of lost the war against the sexual revolution and lost that, we can't lose this battle as well. And that conversation and that battle has to start in our congregations, in our sanctuaries, at our dinner tables, with our young children.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was actually thinking that when I do read the book, I get this sense of, especially later on in the chapter when you talk about your passion towards law, I do get a sense of that you have a political fairness about you, and that you understand the differences between what the church does and what the government does. But in light of the Supreme Court ruling recently, how would you recommend that believers really, I don't want to say address it, because I don't think it needs something that needs to be addressed. Right. But as far as communicating where the church should stand on this particular issue, as somebody who wants to be a lawyer, as someone who's going into law, just the difference between what the church is doing and what the government is doing, so that believers understand where we should be standing, as opposed to just we're not for that, just completely dismissing it. And in terms of some people, I feel like are going to be turned a lot away from the church because they see a lot of that. But there is an appropriate response.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So what would you think that would be?
I would say that, man, we're fortunate enough to live in a great country, a place that I feel like is the best country in the world. I don't apologize for that. I love America, and a part of that is the ability to have that free exercise thereof. We can believe in anything we want to believe, and there are people in certain countries who might be having Bible studies right now in fear of their life, because if they're found reading the Bible, they might get their heads chopped off. So here in America, we have that freedom to worship Christ and talk about our religion, and go out on the street and talk about Christ freely. And so that, and with that freedom also comes the ability for others to disagree with that. My approach I think the church, should focus on is just continuing to love one another. But I juxtapose that with the scripture, right? I'm all for inclusiveness. I'm all for equality. I'm all for fairness, right? But at the same time, if you call yourself a Christian, at a certain point, scripture has to become the final authority over your life, right? And so regardless of how you feel about something, when it comes to your church, when it comes to your congregation, when it comes to your spiritual convictions, the Bible has to trump everything else. And so I think there has to be that fine line. Churches have to continue to show people love and to not push people away with certain issues. But they also have to stick to that which Christ teaches. And I think there's a balance there, and I think there can be a balance. I think it has to be strategic. I think churches have to be intentional about it and then showing compassion. But above all else, like sola scriptura, like scripture is the final authority on our lives, and all scripture is God-breathed, and we have to believe that. Now, if we're getting to the point to where we're having a lot of conversations about people saying, oh, well, there are certain things about scripture I don't agree with, or scripture's not the final authority, then that's a different conversation, and the same-sex marriage argument needs to come second to just the supremacy of Christ, and the inspiration behind the Word of God.
Yeah, and you're right, because if someone doesn't believe that the Word is the final authority, everything that you just said kind of
you got a whole different conversation you need to have.
And so that goes back into you seeking the Lord.
Right.